There comes a moment when the empath grows quiet, not out of defeat, but out of awakening. A moment when the person who has always cared too much suddenly stops, not because they've become cold, but because they've finally seen the truth behind their kindness. You see, there's a hidden exhaustion that lives inside the heart of the empath, the kind that comes from trying to fix what was never theirs to heal. They've spent a lifetime reading every emotional tone, every shift in someone's eyes, always making sure no one ever feels abandoned the way they once did. They call it compassion, but deep down, it's survival. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." For many empaths, that fate is a pattern of relationships where they give endlessly, until there's nothing left of themselves to give. They attract the wounded, the unavailable, the ones who mirror back their own forgotten parts. And they confuse self-sacrifice with love. But when the empath finally stops pleasing, something extraordinary happens. The unconscious begins to surface. The persona, the good one, the peacemaker, starts to crumble. And from beneath it, the shadow rises, the anger, the unmet needs, the longing to be seen without earning it. It is here that the real journey begins, because the empath's awakening is not about becoming less kind. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness, as Jung knew, requires the courage to meet the parts of ourselves we've denied. Even the parts that say, "I'm tired of saving everyone else." So what truly happens when an empath stops caring? When they stop chasing love and begin remembering their own? This is not the death of empathy. It's the rebirth of self. Every empath carries a story that began long before they ever learned the word empathy. It started in the silent spaces of childhood, when love felt conditional and peace depended on keeping others happy. So they became watchful. They learned to sense the smallest shifts in energy, the quiet tension in a room, the sigh that said something's wrong before words ever did. Jung would have called this the birth of a persona, the mask we wear to survive within our early environment. For the empath, that mask was kindness, understanding, endless giving. It was the part of them that kept the peace, that earned safety by being needed. But what no one told them was that behind every light there is a shadow. Behind every act of care lies a hidden fear. If I stop caring, I'll be abandoned. If I say no, I'll lose love. So they became the eternal caregiver. Not because their heart was pure, but because their heart was terrified. This is where Jung's shadow enters the story. The shadow is everything we suppress in order to remain loved. It is our anger, our selfishness, our desire to be seen, buried under the image of the good person. The empath's light is beautiful, but without the shadow, it is incomplete. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For the empath, this means turning toward the parts they've long rejected, the part that's tired of listening, the part that wants to be chosen first, the part that no longer wants to fix anyone. And yet society praises their selflessness. They are told they are so good, so caring, so understanding. But those words can become chains, because goodness that's built on fear is not virtue, it's survival. The empath's shadow begins to whisper when they start to feel resentment. When the thought appears, "Why do I always have to be the strong one?" That whisper is not selfishness. It's the soul's attempt to restore balance. It's the unconscious pushing its way to the surface, saying, "You are allowed to take up space." And when the empath ignores that voice, life begins to reflect it back through others. Partners who take too much, friends who never reciprocate, situations that drain until they collapse. Jung would call this projection. The psyche externalizes what it refuses to see within itself. The empath keeps attracting takers because they have yet to meet their own inner taker, the part of them that longs to receive. Only when they stop labeling this part as bad can they begin to integrate it. Because shadow work is not about rejecting the darkness. It's about seeing it as the missing half of the light. When the empath starts to own their shadow, their compassion no longer comes from fear. It becomes clean, grounded, and discerning. They learn that saying no is not cruelty. It is clarity. That boundaries are not walls. They are doors to authenticity. The shadow, once feared, becomes an ally, and through it, the empath begins to remember. They were never meant to save everyone. They were meant to become themselves. In love, the empath story often repeats itself like a quiet déjà vu. Different faces, different names, yet the same emotional script. They fall for the distant one, the one who cannot meet them fully, the one who makes them feel, once again, invisible. And somewhere inside they whisper, "Maybe if I love harder, they'll finally stay." Carl Jung believed that what we call fate is often nothing more than the unconscious seeking resolution. Until we bring awareness to it, we will continue to repeat the same patterns. Drawn to the same wounds, dressed in different bodies. The empath's pleasing wound is not random. It is the echo of their earliest emotional environment, where love had to be earned and safety had to be maintained. As children, they learned, "If I can sense what you need, maybe you won't leave me." So they built their identity around being indispensable, needed, helpful, good. But this is not love. It is an ancient survival code disguised as devotion. Jung spoke of the complex a cluster of memories, emotions, and beliefs that unconsciously shape how we perceive and relate to the world. The empath's love complex says, "My worth depends on how much I give." And so they find themselves magnetically drawn to those who cannot give back, because the unconscious is trying to recreate the original wound, hoping that this time it will end differently. But it never does. The empath gives, the other withdraws, and the dance of over-functioning and under-receiving begins again. Not out of malice, but because both souls are mirroring each other's unhealed parts. The unavailable partner carries the shadow the empath refuses to see. The part that takes, the part that prioritizes the self, the part that says no without guilt. This is Jung's law of projection in motion. What we deny in ourselves, we meet in others. The empath calls the partner selfish, not realizing that this very trait is what they must integrate to become whole. Until they reclaim that power within, they will keep seeking it in someone else. It's a painful truth. Many empaths are not in love with their partners. They are in love with their potential. They are trying to heal the past through the present. But healing cannot happen by changing another. It begins when they finally see that the person who needs their compassion most is themselves. And so, relationships become mirrors, not to punish, but to awaken. Each heartbreak, each disappointment is the psyche's attempt to say, you are still giving what you most crave to receive. When the empath begins to see this pattern not as failure, but as guidance, the entire tone of love shifts. They no longer ask, why don't they love me back? They ask, what part of me believes I'm not worthy of being loved freely? That question changes everything. Because the moment it's asked with sincerity, the unconscious starts to release its grip. The pattern begins to lose its power. And for the first time, love no longer feels like effort. It begins to feel like truth. Every transformation begins with a breaking point. For the empath, it doesn't come in one dramatic scene. It arrives quietly, like an invisible collapse. The messages stop being answered. The heart feels numb, not from indifference, but from depletion. They realize they've been living as a mirror, reflecting everyone else's emotions while their own reflection has slowly disappeared. They have given so much light that their own flame is now just a flicker. And then it happens. A single, quiet thought. I can't do this anymore. This moment is sacred. Because what feels like exhaustion is actually the soul reclaiming its boundaries. It's the psyche saying, enough pretending that love means losing yourself. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are beyond the masks, the roles, the expectations. It's not about becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. The turning point for the empath is not a loss of empathy. It's the birth of consciousness, the awareness that caring has become a disguise for fear, that pleasing has been a form of control, an attempt to make sure love never leaves. But when you finally stop trying to hold love in place, something miraculous happens. You discover the love that never leaves, the one within. Still, this awakening is not gentle. When the empath stops pleasing, all the feelings they've buried beneath kindness rise to the surface. Anger, grief, loneliness, even guilt. It's the shadow knocking on the door, demanding to be felt, not fixed. And here, the ego resists. It says, if I stop giving, who am I? Because the persona, the good one, is dying. And every death of identity feels like chaos before it becomes peace. But the soul knows better. It knows that true compassion begins where false harmony ends. That real love cannot exist in self-abandonment, so it lets the tower fall. It allows the silence, the emptiness, the not knowing. Because within that stillness, the authentic self begins to emerge. This is the alchemical stage Jung spoke of. The nigredo, the dark night of the soul, where everything familiar dissolves, so something more honest can be born. And though it feels lonely, it's not. It's sacred space. A threshold between who you were and who you're becoming. The empath learns to sit in their own company, to hear their own breath again, to touch the stillness that doesn't depend on another's approval. It's here that the balance begins to return. The same sensitivity that once drained them starts to guide them. Intuition sharpens. Self-trust grows. They no longer need to sense every room's energy because they have finally found their own. The turning point isn't loud. It's not fireworks or revenge. It's quiet boundaries. It's peace that doesn't need permission. It's love that begins with self. And from this silence, the empath rises, not as a rescuer, but as a soul reborn. When the empath stops pleasing, a new kind of love begins to bloom, one that no longer asks for permission to exist. For the first time, they begin to feel what wholeness truly means. It's not the end of empathy, it's empathy with roots, no longer reaching outward for validation, but grounded in the quiet knowing of their own worth. Jung taught that healing requires integration, bringing together the fragments of the psyche, the light and the dark, the giver and the receiver, the one who loves and the one who longs to be loved. Only when these opposites meet can the soul become whole. For the empath, integration begins when they stop judging their shadow. When they realize that saying no does not make them cruel, that anger is not evil, that wanting space doesn't mean they've lost their softness. These parts are not flaws. They are boundaries in their most sacred form. They start to see that their sensitivity was never the problem. The problem was believing that love required self-erasure. Now, they give without depletion, listen without absorbing, care without losing themselves in someone else's chaos. They learn the art of conscious love. Love that flows from fullness, not fear. They no longer need to be needed. They simply choose to connect. And that choice carries a different vibration, one that no longer drains, but nourishes. This is the sacred marriage Jung spoke of. The union of the inner masculine and feminine, the balance between doing and being, giving and receiving. The empath no longer seeks their missing half in another person, because they have found that union within themselves. From this place, relationships transform. They stop being mirrors of pain and become mirrors of growth. The empath attracts people who meet them in reciprocity, who respect their no as deeply as their yes, because energy always responds to truth, and nothing is more magnetic than someone who stands in their authenticity. Integration doesn't mean perfection. The old patterns may still whisper. The urge to fix, to smooth things over, to overextend. But now, there's awareness, and awareness is freedom. They pause, they breathe, and instead of reacting, they choose consciously. They ask, does this come from love or fear? That question becomes their compass. Slowly, the empath's compassion transforms into wisdom. They begin to sense the subtle difference between empathy that empowers and empathy that enables. They can hold space for others' pain without abandoning their own peace. And in this new equilibrium, their presence becomes medicine. Not because they heal others by fixing them, but because they embody wholeness. And wholeness has its own quiet power. When the empath integrates their shadow, they no longer orbit around others. They become the center of their own universe, radiating light that comes not from effort, but from alignment. This is what happens when an empath stops pleasing. They become free, and freedom, in its purest form, is love. Without condition, without fear, without the need to disappear. When the empath stops pleasing, the world does not fall apart. The noise simply fades, and in the silence that follows, something ancient awakens, a peace that has been waiting beneath all the striving. They begin to see love differently now, not as a performance, not as sacrifice, but as presence. They realize that to love deeply, you must first stand firmly inside yourself. Otherwise, what you give is not love, but longing in disguise. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That is what this journey has been all along. Not a loss of empathy, but the discovery of authenticity. When you no longer need to be everything for everyone, you finally make space to be something real for yourself. The same heart that once bent for others now beats steadily, quietly, anchored in truth. And from that truth, a new kind of compassion is born. One that doesn't seek to rescue but to witness. To honor another's path without losing your own. Because love, when it is conscious, never demands your disappearance. It invites your presence. The empath who once tried to save everyone now simply shines. Their light no longer blinds them. It guides them. Boundaries become sacred lines of honesty. Silence becomes a friend. Solitude becomes nourishment instead of punishment. And so the circle closes. From pleasing to peace, from self-abandonment to self-remembering. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of living it with awareness. Because when an empath stops pleasing, love doesn't die. Illusion does. And what remains is the raw, luminous truth of being fully alive. If this message touched something within you, remember, you are not here to disappear for love. You are here to become love itself. If you'd like to keep walking this path of awareness and depth, subscribe to Soul of the Mind. And let's continue exploring the psychology of the soul together.